This is an introduction to working with spreadsheets. We're specifically going to be using Microsoft Excel, but many of these same concepts apply to Google Sheets. Just that things might be in a little different place or look a little differently, but it generally works the same. So some things to look at first about spreadsheets. Um, Excel operates on as when you make a new file in Excel, it creates what's called a workbook. And a workbook can have multiple sheets. You'll see that this one has multiple sheets. If you look in the lower left corner, there's a sheet called Twins Brewers, another one called MLB Payrolls, another one called Sheet 1. If I click on this plus button, it makes a whole new sheet for me. And if I double click on there, I can type a new name on there, and I have a sheet. Each sheet is made up of columns that are lettered by the alphabet A through, it goes on and on. And then the rows are numbered 1 through whatever. Each cell has an address. So right now my cursor is in B3, and it tells you up here in the upper left corner there's a little cell that tells you what cell address your cursor is currently in. So now I'm in F7 and now I'm in B11. These cell addresses are very crucial because we will be using them to do formulas in a couple minutes. If you've ever played the game Battleship, this works very much the same way. It's the alignment of the row and the column. So it's always a good idea to know where what cell address you're in and where your data is in. So for example, this MLB payrolls data, the header row is in cells A1 through D1, and my data is in A2 through D31 down here at the bottom. And my payroll information is in the B, C, and D column, and the team name is in the A column. Some other things. So when you have your cursor on a cell, if you move your cursor around, you'll see that the image of the cursor changes a little bit. There's 3 different cursors. This one I call the big fat white plus sign. It's the most benign of the tools. It doesn't do much. When this cursor is visible and you push on your left mouse button and hold down and then drag either to the right or down or both, it highlights anything that you've covered. So that's the big fat white plus sign, very benign. If you hover toward the top of your cell, you're going to get an arrow with a kind of a bunch of arrows there. This, we jokingly call this the evil arrow because when Excel first started, if you used this, you could accidentally move something and Excel would not warn you that you were going to drop some data on top of some other data. But that doesn't happen anymore. But this is how you'd actually move something that's in a cell. So for example, if I take this and I click when I have this cursor, it will physically move it to a new location wherever I've dragged it. I've seen beginners, when I tell them to highlight a row of data, so let's go in here, let's say I say highlight the names of the teams like this. I see some people accidentally get that evil arrow and then they go to move and they actually move the whole thing. Control Z will get that undone, of course. So you want to think carefully about what cursor you have visible when you go to do something. Now the cursor that we're going to use a lot is the copy tool, and you only get that when you hover into the lower right corner of the cell that you have your cursor on, and it'll turn into a thin black cross. This is tricky, and this is especially tricky if you're using a touchpad on a computer. It's kind of hard to get that in just the right place. I always recommend beginners use a mouse when they're doing this, just because of this fact here. So when you get the copy tool, if you pull down on this or even pull to the right, You can't pull left and you can't pull up. You can only pull down and to the right. But when you copy that, you'll see it copied the contents of our cell. In this case, it just repeated that word over and over again. In a little bit, we're gonna do some formulas, and when we copy those formulas down, if there's a formula in the cell, it will actually copy the formula. So I'm gonna put a bunch of numbers in here, and so let's say I want to add together what's in C7, which is that 40, plus what's in D7. So in a calculator, we'd type 40 plus 2, and we would get 42, right? So Excel works a lot like a calculator in that you can do these math calculations. Up here, this is the formula bar, and it's going to show your formula. You can also get your formula to come back by double-clicking on the cell where you typed it, and it will show you this. It will allow you to go back in and edit it, and it will also highlight any cells that you're referencing in your formula. So here I'm saying C7 plus D7. Now, in order to avoid having to retype that formula for the next row, I want to repeat the same math on a new row. We can use the copy down tool. And this time what's going to happen, it's not going to copy the 42. It's going to copy this formula. And what's going to happen is Excel is going to guess that this time instead of C7 plus D7, you're going to want C8 plus D8 because you're copying down. So if we get our copy tool and drag it down, you'll see that now, yes, it is said, oh, you want C8 plus D8, and now you want C9 plus D9. That's great. And we only had to type that formula one time. Imagine being able to do that on a whole sheet. The same will be true if we wanted to go across. So let's say we want to add together all of these values. This is a sum function we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I've added together all those values, and now I want to do the same for those values. If I copy this across, instead of saying sum C7 through C9, our new formula is going to guess, oh, you want D7 to D9. Because you've moved to the right, it's guessed that you want to switch columns. And it automatically did that for you. We'll learn how to lock that in place so that it doesn't do that in cases where you maybe don't want it to do that. But this is the default practice in Excel. So that's how cell addresses work and cursors work. The formula bar is up here. And we talked about workbooks and worksheets. The only other thing you might need to know is that if for some reason your columns are not wide enough, like here, if I make this too small, it's going to just show a pound sign on my numbers. Up here, you can, when you put your cursor up in the gray area between those letters, you'll see that you get a different cursor that will allow you to widen things out. And you can either drag or you can double click and it will make it as wide as it needs to be. And you'll see here, it doesn't need to be very wide because these are small, so maybe I want to drag. You can drag it to what you want. Now and the same thing works for the rows. You can make rows wider. And then one more thing, there's a little triangle between the A and the 1, this little space. If you click on the triangle, it highlights your entire sheet, which will be everything, not just what's in your data. But that is how you'd be able to highlight your entire sheet. Maybe you want to copy and paste it somewhere else, or there's a lot of different, or you want to do some formatting or something. There may be reasons for doing that. We'll get into a little bit more about these various menus up here at the top. I have a menu that you might not have called Tableau. Ignore that for now. That's an add-in that I've added in. And yours might look a little different if you have a Mac. Most of the things are in the same place, but it might look just a little bit different. Okay, so let's go over to MLB payrolls. So this is some older data, but it works really nice for this exercise. We have 3 years worth of payroll data for each team. One of the main rules you want to have working with data, no matter what tool you're using, whether it's Excel or some fancier tools that are out there, you want to have what's called tidy data. That means that it's a nice, neat rectangle, that there's not empty rows or empty columns in the middle of your data. I've seen data come to me from government agencies where they've done things like this, put some blank columns in the middle to, I don't know, for spacing purposes, to make it look better or something. Those will make it very hard for you to do any kind of analysis. So I'm going to undo to get rid of those. Same thing with blank rows somewhere in the middle of your data. You don't want that at all. And you also don't want something like this where there's some notes up here. Oops, MLB. You don't want, you want your header row and your data, and you don't want anything else right next to it. So this should, either your header row needs to be the first row, or there needs to be a blank row above it. And then same thing down below here, you want a blank row at the bottom or nothing else below it, either way. I'm going to get rid of these and we'll just start with our header on A1. So, and then the final rule is that you have labels on all your headers, on all your columns. When you get into things like pivot tables, that header becomes crucial, but more importantly, it's for you and the future you when you open up this spreadsheet a few weeks or months from now and you have completely forgotten what that column is. So label it good and clear and in a way, something that you will understand. Excel has no limitations on how long those columns headers can be. If you have any plans to work with data in programming language or in a SQL program or a GIS program, then you want to keep these nice and tight and neat like I've done here. In fact, these are not neat. These have spaces in them. Really high quality names would have either no spaces, or you can use an underscore to kind of make the impression of a space. That would be like top-notch, best case scenario. All right, so the other thing, couple of tools that we use all the time would be sorting. So let's say we want to sort this largest to smallest by the most recent payroll. The main rule of thumb, there's a bunch of different tools and buttons and things for sorting in Excel, but I teach it one way using the custom sort button because it gives you the most control and allows you to really truly see what you're doing, so you're not just randomly clicking buttons and not knowing exactly what you're doing. And that's an approach I take in all of my teaching. So yes, there are some shortcuts for summing up a column, but I'm not going to show you the shortcut. I want you to know how it actually works under the hood. So before you sort, the key thing is that you want to make sure your cursor is somewhere inside your data. You don't want it out here in the big empty open space. You want it somewhere inside this data. Then go up to the data menu, the top, and there is a sort and filter section kind of in the middle of the screen. And you want the big sort button. This is called the custom sort button. Don't use these little A to Z and Z to A buttons. Use this custom sort. And that's going to bring up a little window where you can have full control over what it's going to do. So it should have identified that your data has headers. That should be checked. My data has headers. You want to make sure that's there. Then you'll see that in the sort by column, it will have your headers of each of your columns. If this is unchecked, for example, it'll just say column A, B, C, and it will think that your header row is actually part of the data, which we don't want. So I'm going to check that back on again. So we can choose here which column we want to sort by. So if we want to sort by the most recent payroll, 2011, then we can choose smallest to largest or largest to smallest. And it'll say, this will change, this will say like A to Z if you do it on a team name. We'll do that in a minute, but otherwise it says largest to smallest. The sort on gives you some fancy options for sorting on cell color and some other strange things. That's really unnecessary. Just stick with cell values and say largest to smallest. and now it's going to sort, of course, the New York Yankees are at the top. And we now have it sorted. Notice it moved everything. I'm going to go back to that again, and this time let's sort by the team, and you'll see now it's switched to A to Z and Z to A. I'm going to say A to Z, we'll put it alphabetical, which is where it was before, A to Z. The other tool that you can sometimes use is find useful is the filters. So that's also up in the data menu, and it should still be up there. Again, have your cursor somewhere in your data and turn on this filter button. Just depress it and it'll turn a dark gray. And then on your columns, you'll see that it now has these little pull down menus here. And what the pull down menus are doing is giving you one instance of each value that is in the column. This is not super interesting on this particular data set because you'll see that every value in here is different. The teams only show up one time and things like that. But if you have a big data set with lots of rows and you want to pluck out just, let's say this did have like every row was a player and you wanted to find all the players on a particular team and one of the columns was a team, then you could use that to say, let's find all the Chicago Cubs players. So I'm going to click on this little pull down menu here, and I can unselect all, and then I can say click on Chicago Cubs. I just want the Cubs, and it'll filter my data to just the ones where that team column says Chicago Cubs. Notice that on the left, the rows are now skipping. It goes from 1 to 6 to 32, and the filtered rows show up in blue instead of black. So that is a cue to you that you have your filters on. Also notice that this little pull down now has a different image on it, so you can see that you are filtered. This is important when you have a really big data set and you don't maybe have forgotten that you turned a filter on. To turn it off, you can go back in there and say clear filter from team. So on numeric fields like these payrolls, we can also do things like number filters. Here's greater than, equal to, less than, between, top 10, etc. So we could say greater than or equal to, let's say 100 million. There. So these are the top teams with more than 100 million in payroll. So there's a lot of different options there that you can do with that. There is sorting options in here as well. This one, it will sort, if you're on this column and you say sort largest to smallest, it will sort based on that column. So there's a little more control here on that. I'm going to put it back to the team name, A to Z. There. Okay, so that's sorting and filtering. Let's move on to some basic math calculations. Excel was created for bookkeeping and accounting, and so it's really good at math functions and working with lots of numbers. As data journalists, we don't always do that, but in the cases that we do, Excel or another spreadsheet program are the correct tool for doing this. Or at least the simplest tool, I should say. There's a very low bar for learning. So one of the things we might want to do is say, what's the percentage change from year to year or across the 2 years for each team? Let's do from 2010 to 2011. We'll keep it simple. So I'm going to label my column here, percent change 10-11. That tells me that we're going from 2010 to 2011. So percent change calculation is new minus old divided by old. That's how you remember it. New minus old divided by old. Or an acronym is kind of a shortcut is thinking about no. So if we were doing this with a calculator, we'd have to type all this out. All those numbers, but in Excel we can just use these cell addresses and tell it take what's in D2, which is our new number, our most recent number, minus our old number, which is C2, and divide it by the old number. So this is the only time I'm going to give you some algebra to do. We're doing two mathematical calculations in one. We're doing the subtraction and then the division. So we need to put the subtraction in parentheses to alert Excel that we want that done first. That's the first order, the order of operations. So every formula always starts with an equal sign, and then it's your formula. So in this case, we want to do the subtraction. So we need open parentheses D2 minus C2. There's the new minus old, and close the parentheses, and then divide by, which is the slash under your question mark on your keyboard, and then our old number is C2. You'll see that it's highlighting your cells and turning them in colors to tell you what you're doing. When you're done with your formula, you hit enter, and it will jump the cursor down to the next cell. So then you want to put your cursor back on the cell, and here you can see we have a percentage change, but it's expressed as a decimal. So we can format that to a percentage. The easiest way is to, when your cursor is back on that number, right mouse click, and one of your options in here is format cells. There's lots of nifty things in this menu. Right mouse click, format cells. You can see we can make this a percentage, and we can tell it how many decimal places. I'm a huge fan of ditching the decimals, so I'm going to set it to 0. And now that is formatted. It's still a formula. Here you can see our formula up in the formula bar. And now we need to copy it down. So you get in the lower corner with your copy tool, get the black thin cross copy tool, drag it down to the bottom of the list. And you'll see that it has automatically guessed that when we moved down, we wanted to go to row 3, and then we wanted to go to row 4, and then we wanted to go to row 5, and on, away it went. So now we can put our cursor in our data, go to sort. Let's see who had the biggest increase. So let's say largest to smallest. Oh, the Texas Rangers, 67% in 1 year. Wow. And then at the bottom, the Royals, they must have cleaned house, emptied out their roster, have some big guns probably. All right, so that is percent change. It's a common one that we use. Another one, which I showed you a little bit at the beginning, was we might want to add up a column. So let's go down here, and remember I said we want to keep things separate from our data. So a total line would be separate. So we'll start on row 33, and what we want to do is we want to add up all these values between B2 and B31. In Excel, as you saw in my example, you can use the plus sign to add values together. But if you have that range of values, a whole bunch of them, it's simpler to use what's called the sum function. This is a baked-in function in Excel. And what you do is you feed it two arguments. The first argument is where the range of values starts. In this case, that's B2, and then you put in a colon. And then the second argument is where the range ends, which is B31. And then you close the parentheses. And you'll see that it's highlighted in blue, the range of values that it's going to add together. You hit enter, and you should have $2.6 billion. Now, we want to do that same formula, but for column C and column D, you can simply drag this across. And oh, it's not wide enough, so we're going to widen these columns out. You'll see that it has guessed that we wanted to go to C, and then over here we wanted to go to D. So there is our sum. The other things we often use are average and median. In this case, what we would be able to calculate is the average total payroll out of all the teams each year. It's different than the average paycheck per player, keep in mind, but the average payroll. And again, Excel has a built-in function called average. Notice I typed it in lowercase, and it's appearing in your little help dialogue with capital letters, but that does not matter. It's the same thing here. We feed it the same arguments. B2 colon B31, the same set of values. And now it's telling us that the average payroll is about 88 million. And that is now, in 2011, that's up to more than almost 93 million. We can also do the median payroll. So the difference between, well, let me start with this. The function is exactly the same, B2, B31. So the rule of thumb with median and average, averages tend to be skewed by big or small outliers. This is probably not as big of a deal here when you're talking about the team level, but if we were talking about the individual player level, then one really big paid player on a team would skew the team's overall average paycheck amounts when you're talking player by player. And in that case, then you'd want to use a median, which is the middle value. If you align all the players up from end to end in order of their paychecks, you count down to the whoever sits in the exact middle of the bunch, that would be the median. So in this case, it's done the same thing with the teams. It's lined them up from smallest to largest and counted down, what is there, like 29 teams or 20 teams or something like that, whichever one's in the middle, and that's what it gives you. So the rule of thumb, though, the other thing you can do is how close are the two things together. If they're super far apart from each other, usually that means you need to use the median, because that means the average is probably skewed. In this case, they're not very far apart from each other. They're a little off. This one's going to be a crapshoot on which one you want to use. An average is a little easier for the public to understand, but sometimes you have to use median. So let's do one more quick before we run out of time. Sometimes we want to do percent of total, and we'll do 2011. So we want to know what percentage is the Texas Rangers payroll out of the total payroll across the whole Major League Baseball. This allows us to see things like whether one team is really dominating and paying a lot more than everybody else, kind of the equity across the teams. So the math here, the basic math would be that we want to take this number divided by this grand total. So it's a simple division, D2, and notice I just clicked on D2 to get it to fill in my address. You can do that. Divided by, and I'm going to click on D33. So that's going to give me an accurate total. I'm going to format these cells. It's going to give me an accurate percentage for the Texas Rangers here, about 3%. But now I'm going to copy this down, and I'm suddenly going to get divide by 0 errors. Well, what went wrong? Let's suss it out. So we know that this first formula is correct, D2 divided by D33. But now here it said it went to D3, which is correct, divided by D34. What's in D34? Aha, it's our average. That's not what we wanted. We wanted it to stay on D33, right? We didn't want it to move. So let's go back to our original formula up here and double click in so you can edit it. We need to tell Excel it's okay to move the first one, the numerator, so it goes down to D3, D4, D5, but the denominator we want it to stay on D33 all the time. And the way to do that is lock it in. Excel decided that the symbol for locking is going to be a $sign. Don't ask me why. Every time I teach this, people ask me why is it the $sign, and I'm like, I have no idea. It just is the $sign. So the $sign, if you put the $sign in front of the D and in front of the 33, what's going to happen is it's going to lock it on that one cell, no matter whether you copy down or copy to the right. It'll always stay on that cell. If we were to do just the $sign in front of the 33, it will lock it on row 33, but it would enable moving your formula moving to the right. I generally say if you know for sure you want to lock it on this one hard and fast cell, just put in both $signs in front of the D and in front of the 33. It's a little more advanced. There's times where you want only one because you want something to move, but that's a little more advanced than what we're going to cover here. So now I've redone that. Now I'm going to copy this back down. And now I have correct answers. Yay, and we'll quickly sort on our new percent of total, largest to smallest. Oh, no surprise there, New York Yankees, 7% of the total. There you go. Thank you for watching.